I'm Michael Riccards for the Hall Institute of Public Policy, and this is our forum, and we're back today with Marc Mappen, who is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Historical Commission, and we were talking about Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, and his famous railroad trip in March 1861 through the state of New Jersey. You were talking, Mark, about the fact that when he came to the legislature, he got out and he made two speeches, one to the General Assembly and one to the State Senate. And in one of them, which one was it?
The Senate.
In the Senate one, he referred to the United States in that great expression as an almost chosen people. What does that mean?
Well, let me say first that a lot of historians have fixed on that phrase, an almost chosen people, and have speculated on it. But interestingly, Lincoln never used that expression afterwards, or he never used it before. He just came up with it in Trenton. And I think what it means is, well, he was comparing Americans to the chosen people of the Bible, the Old Testament, the Israelites, who had entered into a special relationship with God and were therefore under God's divine protection. But not Americans. Why not? Well, there must have been some great wrong that America committed. That's what he hinted at in his speech in Trenton, without saying what that great wrong was. But about 4 years later, when he was the President of the United States, the war was winding down, he had just been reelected, he was just a few weeks away from being assassinated, when he gave his second inaugural address, which is justly considered one of the greatest speeches in American history. And in that speech, he talked about the Civil War and what it had meant. And he described it as the divine punishment of God visited on Americans for the sin of slavery. It was slavery, he was saying, for which both the North and the South were implicated, had practiced, had protected. It was for that reason that this horrible, bloody war was happening. And he used that great analogy. He said that every drop of blood drawn from the whip, from the lash, must be repaid by a drop of blood drawn by the sword, meaning this was America's atonement for its being implicated in slavery. And it's in that speech that he talked about binding up the wounds of the soldier, his widow, his children, not differentiating between northern and southern soldiers, but saying, with charity towards all, with malice towards none, we have to bind up the wounds of this nation. So I think it's a great, profoundly religious, profoundly moral sentiment that he was speaking of.
So this modest speech to the New Jersey Senate was, in a sense, a prefiguring of two much greater speeches.
Yes.
The Declaration, the Emancipation Proclamation, and its sentiments, but also, of course, the Gettysburg Address and the second inaugural address as well. Three speeches that are significant to us.
Yeah. In the case of the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln, when he was at Trenton, as I said earlier, he talked about 1776 and the American victory at the Battle of Trenton, and that there was something that made that special, that it was important. It was not just a fight between two groups. But he didn't say what it was, what made America special. But he did in his Gettysburg Address, where he said, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, which is paraphrasing in some ways the Declaration of Independence. And then, later in the speech, he said that this government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. So what he said in Trenton in 1861 about the special promise that America held out, he elaborated on in Gettysburg when he said it was that government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And he went beyond that, and he said in the Gettysburg Address that this nation was experiencing a new birth of freedom, that it was more now, something more had happened since the Declaration of Independence. That now the issue of abolishing slavery and of equality was something that America was fighting for.
Now, Lincoln was one of the great wordsmiths in American history.
Yeah.
We know that just by reading not only his speeches, but some of his famous letters, his previous speeches before he became president, the famous debates that he got himself involved in with Douglas, and of course the speech, the House divided speech, which he kind of repeated at Cooper Union. But yet he only had 4 months education. Where did he learn the ability to use the English language in such a way that we remember it in the way we do?
Well, I think the answer might be in the fact that he was an obsessive reader. He read everything that he got his hands on when he was young and when books were really unusual. And he didn't skim them. He really absorbed everything that he read, and he thought about it deeply. And there are many anecdotes by people who knew Lincoln who said he always had a book and he was always thinking. And I think he was largely self-educated. You know, he read Shakespeare, he read the Bible. He was very literate, and he was a wonderful writer too. There's a new book out about Lincoln as a writer, and it talks about he was writing nonfiction. His speeches are nonfiction, but in a way they were stories. Like the Gettysburg Address is a story about the American people, and the second inaugural is too. And in all his great writings, he was a very dynamic, very powerful speaker.
So he basically kind of taught us how to interpret ourselves.
Yes.
Through what are fairly old paradigms, fairly old language models that people at that time understood. They did read the Bible.
Yes.
Every family that could had the Bible, and Shakespeare was standard in many areas, and those are not bad role models for the 19th century, are they?
Absolutely not.
We'll be back in a minute to talk about Abraham Lincoln coming through the state of New Jersey.